Fabulous. Good morning, everyone. Hey, really, really good to see you. Thank you for making it out to the Forge today. I know it's mainly because there's a barbecue afterwards, but even so, I'm really, really glad that you're here. My name is Steve. I'm one of the leaders here at the Forge. And we, as Becky says, we're involved in this last kind of session of this series called Dress to Impress. You know, what we wear says so much about who we are as people. You know, often it's a giveaway as to a little bit of who we are. It tells us a little bit about who we are. So let me just give you an example of that. I'm just going to put, here we go. Now, what can you tell from this guy, from what he's wearing? He's Scottish. Aye. Anything else? He's had a wee dram. Aye. I think that's very likely as well. Anything else? Patriot, yeah, absolutely. He is sold out on Scotland, isn't he? I mean, this is a photo before Scotland started playing at the Euros. Okay, I just thought I would mention that. Okay, so what he's wearing kind of helps us to know who he identifies with, where he's from, all of that kind of stuff. Let me show you another photograph. What does this say about this person? What does it say? Fabulous, okay, yeah. Eccentric, okay, yes. Anything else? Sorry? She likes jewelry, yes. I think she's very bold, isn't she? She's funky, absolutely she is. That's right. I think she's quite courageous. She's probably very, very creative as well. I think often creative people look to dress in a slightly alternative way, just something a bit unique to them, which I think is lovely. So do you see how clothing can give away a little bit of who we are as people? Now, of course, we also wear certain clothes for certain occasions. You know, we don't just wear the same thing day in and day out. There are often special occasions where you look to wear something different. So here we go. This is a picture of my youngest, Rachel. Thank you very much. On the day that she got married, and her dress was beautiful. I think it cost quite a bit as well. And for her to wear it on that day was so incredibly special. But if she was wearing it today and tomorrow when she goes to work and the next day, well, we would be a little concerned for her, wouldn't we? Because it's just not appropriate. That is a dress for a one occasion. I grew up going to church, and on a Sunday, we had to put on our Sunday best when we went to church. Little suit or whatever it was, wearing a little tie as well. So you had to put on your Sunday clothes. Certainly that was my kind of upbringing. Today, as you can sense, it's the opposite. Okay, it is casual clothes to church. And actually, do you know what? That's intentional, because what we want to be able to do is to create a feel here that's informal, that's relaxed. If everyone turned up in suits, it would feel a lot more formal and a lot more kind of rigid. And so what we're wanting to do is to create an environment through what we wear for people to feel welcome and included. I remember a guy called Ashley who came. He was a young man. He must have been in his early 20s. He came to the Forge from a very small local Baptist church in the late 90s. And he arrived in a full suit, a pinstripe suit with tie. And now there was nothing wrong with that, but he just stuck out like a sore thumb within our church community. And do you know what was great? He kept coming in that suit until he moved away. He wasn't going to change for anyone. But you know, our clothes tell a lot about who we are, who we identify with, and in a sense, what we value. Our clothes are a bit of a marker as to who we are. Now, Paul, who wrote a number of letters found in the New Testament in the second part of the Bible, he wrote to a church in Colossae. It's a place where he had traveled to, and he had spoken about Jesus, about who Jesus was, about how Jesus had died and how he had risen again. And there were some people within that city who listened to Paul and thought, we go with this. We like this. This is something I want to commit my life to. And so he set up this small community in the city of Colossae, and it was known as the Colossian Church. And a few years later, Paul was in prison. He was held as a prisoner in Rome. And he decided that he wanted to write to his friends in Colossae, and he wanted to give them some advice on how to keep living out their faith. And so these are the words that he writes to them. He says this: "So, chosen by God for this new life of love." In other words, he's recognizing that they've changed. They've gone from a way of life that excluded God and was probably fairly self-centered towards this new way of life, which is a life of love. He says, "Dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you." And so he then goes on to explain a little bit about the clothing that he wants you and I to put on each day. And so on week 1, Becky picked up on this. The wardrobe that God picked out is compassion and kindness. And I love just that little phrase that she mentioned, compassion, when love meets suffering and stays loving. You can't have compassion without suffering. Compassion comes as a result of seeing that. And it's loving and loving and loving. I love that. I love that. I think that's beautiful. Wear that every day. Wow. Won't people be drawn to us? Then he goes on to say this. He says, compassion and kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline, be even-tempered, content with second best. In other words, don't keep pushing yourself forward. Think of others. And I loved what C.S. Lewis said about humility. He said this: humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's not putting yourself down. It's not saying I'm rubbish. But it is thinking of yourself less. In other words, thinking of others first. Then he goes on and carries on this wardrobe. That's why it has to be a wardrobe, because there are so many items of clothing that go into this. Be quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. We weren't able to meet as a whole church together last week, so we had an online service where we looked at this whole issue of forgiveness. And I spoke a little bit about Everett Worthington, the professor of psychology who had done the research into what enables people to find emotional forgiveness. And he spoke about that acronym of REACH, representing a different thing for each of those letters. If you've missed any of these, honestly, I would really strongly recommend that you either go back to our website and you can watch them online, you can go to our YouTube channel, or you can listen to it via a podcast on the Forge site too. So we're going into today, that's a quick recap for those of you who haven't heard any of that. We're going to go on to the final part of what Paul says about the wardrobe that God sets out for us. And he goes on to say this: and regardless of what else you put on, because there are other things, we can put on patience, we can put on, all kinds of other clothing, but regardless of whatever else we put on, he says, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose. This is not a wedding dress event, okay? So love is not just for special occasions. This is a basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. That's the wardrobe that God sets out for us. And this all-purpose clothing that shapes who we are and gives a bit of an identity of who we identify with. Now, put on your basic garment of love. Just sounds lovely, doesn't it? If only we could all just love each other. Just have a bit of love and peace, man. You know, a few flowers as well. It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? But of course, what Jesus is saying, what Paul is saying here is so much earthier, so much grittier, so much harder than it first sounds. You see, when Paul was writing his letter, he was going back to some words that he'd heard John, one of Jesus' disciples, speak about. And John had recounted what Jesus had said on the night before he was crucified. Now, that was a very significant night. John and Peter and the other disciples had met together. They'd had what they're known as the Passover meal together. And then Judas had got up and left because, Judas had got plans to earn himself a little bit of cash on the side by betraying Jesus to the authorities. And then Jesus, with the other 11, was sitting in this room. They'd finished their meal. And he comes out with these words, which was to become the hallmark of the church. And sadly, has probably got lost over the decades and centuries since. Now, what Jesus says won't be revolutionary to us because we've heard this so many times. But to the disciples, boy, it would have been. This is what Jesus said, and this is what Paul is basing this all-purpose garment of love on. Jesus said this. He says, a new command I give you. So straight away, the disciples were intrigued to find out what's he going to say. Because that word new is a word called kainos, and it translates as unexpected or of a different quality or a different form from the old. So this new command that Jesus was going to be different to what they had been used to before. And was it a new command that you add to the old commandments? So they knew the 10 commandments, so this was number 11. Great, let's just add another one. Or was it a new one to add to the 600 plus laws that they had to try and live their lives by? And Jesus just says, no. No, this is a brand new command that I'm giving you. And this is what he says. He says, you're to love one another. Now, again, reading that sounds easy, doesn't it? You're to love one another until you look around you. Okay, and see who you're sitting next to. I think, really? A new command. And why this was new is because this command, and I want you to understand this, this is a new command that overrides the 10 commandments and overrides the 600 laws that the people had to try and live their lives by. Why do I say that? Well, it's because the 10 commandments were given to the people of Israel after they had been rescued out of slavery from Egypt. And God says, I want you to be set apart. And so I want you to follow these rules. These rules are the markers that you belong to me. And so that's what the Israelites endeavored to try and do. That's why the 10 commandments and the Torah was so important to them. But now Jesus is here, and he introduces a new marker for those who would call themselves followers of Jesus. Was that new marker to keep a set of rules? No, it wasn't. Was it to know lots of the Bible? No, it wasn't. The marker of a Jesus follower was that they love one another. Not just put up with one another, not just, I won't talk behind their back anymore, kind of love one another. No, this was to really love one another. The Greek word for love in this context that Jesus would have used was the word agape, which is an unconditional. It's an unconditional love. It's a reckless love. It's a sacrificial love. It's a love that says, I will give love even if I don't get anything in return. And so Jesus wasn't making this word love a feeling. It's so I feel loving towards. No, he was making it a verb, an action, something to do, something to express. Which is why Paul spoke about putting on compassion and kindness and humility and forgiveness. Why? Because all of those are different expressions of this overall garment called love. And Jesus goes on to say this. He says, the new commandment I give you, love one another. And then he kind of qualifies it. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. If you want to know what Jesus meant when he said we're to love one another, we've just got to watch how he loved. So he fed the hungry and he healed the sick and he spoke words of life and hope to people. He included the marginalized and the broken, and he showed value and respect to everyone. But for the disciples, this was much more personal than just those things out there. He chose unexpected, not good enough people to be with him, to learn from him, to become like him. So Matthew, take one of the disciples of Jesus. Matthew was a tax collector. And tax collectors worked for the enemy. They worked for the invaded country, or the invading nation of Israel, the Romans. So he put himself out to be supportive of them and to collect money from his own people to give to the Romans and to line his own pocket. Tax collectors were deemed by the Jews so flipping awful that they had their own category, that you could have sinners and tax collectors. Okay, they were that bad, all right? So they were separated out from just bad people. These were the worst of the worst. And yet Jesus approached one of the worst, and he looked him in the eye, and he says, Matthew, come follow me. You can be like me. You can watch and learn from me. I believe in you. And the Bible says that Matthew in his own account says that he left what he was doing and he went off and followed Jesus. There was something different about this man. And then he went to he called all of his friends around, all of these disreputable people, and invited Jesus to come along. And they had a wild time. It was a brilliant time. And all the religious leaders looked up and just tutted and said, that's awful, that's terrible. What is he doing mixing with those people? And what was amazing is that people who were nothing like Jesus liked him. I find that amazing. People who were so different to Jesus with regards to their lifestyle, their view on life. They were so different to him, and yet they were drawn to him. And why were they drawn to him? It's because he loved them. He put their needs first. He felt compassion for them. He was kind to them. He was patient with them. He wore love as a basic, all-purpose garment wherever he went. And then there was Nathanael. Nathanael was another one of the disciples who was invited to meet Jesus. And his response wasn't a very positive one. His response when he first heard about Jesus was this: can anything good come out of Nazareth? Which is a bit like saying, can anything good come out of Norfolk? It's that kind of insult, yeah? Which is a reasonable question, which we could stop and discuss for no, not really. Which was a tad prejudice against those people from the north of Israel. And yet Jesus doesn't take offense at it. He doesn't push him away. He includes him and he loves him and he enables him to go and heal the sick and preach the good news about God. He welcomes him, prejudice and all. And Jesus showed patience and kindness and generosity and compassion to his followers. He really loved them. That's why we're to look and to learn from him. So the new commandment I give you, love one another as I've loved you. So this is even before Jesus died and demonstrated ultimately his love for them. So you must love one another. And then by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. So following Jesus isn't about how much we know, how many rules we keep, how religious that we try to be. It's not about whether we can put our hands in the air to worship or whether we can recite the books of the Bible from Genesis all the way through to Revelation. Following Jesus is much more simple than that. We've got to learn to love one another. Love one another when someone says a sharp word to us. To love one another when we disagree over something. To love one another when the other person is just irritating. To love one another when we don't feel listened to. I love the Passion translation of Paul's description of what love is, because love can kind of seem a little bit ethereal, can't it? This is how the Passion version describes 1 Corinthians 13. Love is large and incredibly patient. Love is gentle and constantly kind to all. Now, you just think of your marriage, think of your friendships, think of your work situation, think of those people that annoy you. This is what love looks like. Love refuses to be jealous when blessings come to someone else. Love doesn't brag about one's achievements or inflate its own importance. Love does not traffic in shame and disrespect, nor selfishly seek its own honor. Love is not easily irritated or quick to take offense. Love is not quick to take offense. Love joyfully celebrates honesty and finds no delight in what's wrong. Love is a safe place of shelter, for it never stops believing the best for others. Love never takes failure as defeat, and it never gives up. Paul describes as much of what love isn't as what love is. And can you imagine what a world would be like if we learnt to do that? That every follower of Jesus learnt to love in those ways. The distinguishing characteristic of a follower of Jesus has to be, needs to be, Jesus calls us to be love. Loving one another doesn't mean that it will always put situations right. We won't always, well, if I choose to love them, then they're bound to kind of change and be lovely back to me again. That is not the case. Who was the ultimate person who wore the garment, this basic all-purpose garment of love? It was Jesus. And what happened to him? He was crucified. So this isn't a love and it will put everything right. It's love because it will demonstrate who God is. That's the calling that we have on our lives. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciple if you love one another. If you think that's hard within your family, and if you think that's hard within your workplace, I tell you, Jesus, I wish he didn't say this. There's some bits of the Bible, I think if we could just take that out, it would be really handy, okay, when it comes to love. Because earlier, a man called Luke records some words of Jesus when he speaks about love. He says this, but to you who are willing to listen, so that's why we do that sometimes. To you who are willing to listen, I say, and this is the bit I'd love for him to remove, but he doesn't. Love your enemies. How many of you have got an enemy? See, it's strange, isn't it? Put your hands down very quickly. Okay. An enemy doesn't seem like a kind of a regular word that we would use of someone that they're my enemy. So what I just thought I would do, I would make it a little bit more relatable. So, but for you who are willing to listen, I say, love your abusive neighbor. Or love your ex-wife or your ex-husband. Or love your inconsiderate boss. Or love your annoying work colleague. All of a sudden, do you see how difficult this is? Jesus is asking for what seems like the impossible. It's difficult not to be mean to mean people, isn't it? Because we want to get our own back. It's difficult to be kind to those who have been unkind to us. It's so difficult to not give in to the temptation of dissing people in public or online, especially online. And there are times when just looking through Instagram and stuff like that, some of the things that I see followers of Jesus posting online about others just makes me wince and cringe inside. Because it's the opposite of what Jesus calls us to do. It's the opposite to the description of love. Getting back at people doesn't help. Getting back at people makes things worse. We're allowing them to pull us down to their level so that we become like them. So what does it look like to actually love others in those really difficult situations? Well, Jesus helps us. There isn't a blanket answer. You've got to bake cakes for them. No, you can try that, but that might work for some. But that's not what it's about. There's no blanket answer, but your response, your first response will often be not the one to do. The first response that we feel probably won't be the best one. So Jesus helps us by speaking about some tangible actions. So he goes on to say this. After love your enemies, he says, do good to those who hate you. What might doing good look like in your situation? What kind of compassionate thing could you do for that person? It might not change anything of that situation, but it might, because doing good might allow for God to work within that situation in unexpected ways. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, and pray for those who hurt you. How can you positively pray for someone who's hurt you? This is an expression of what love looks like. How about asking God to bless them, to give them a good day? You might not feel it, but you can choose it. And to love doesn't mean not challenging bad behavior. To love doesn't mean having no boundaries. Love must be tough at times. But love is the opposite to hate. And our actions need to reflect that. We need to check our motives all of the time. So be loving. Honestly, I appeal to you. Be loving in what you say in public about those people. Don't create more division and stir up more hatred by getting more people on your side. And be careful what you post on social media. Don't use it to vent your anger. Why is this important? Because Jesus goes on to say, amazing words, love your enemies, then your reward from heaven will be very great. And this is remarkable, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High. Why? Because he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. So when it comes to the story of your life, let's not write a predictable story. The predictable story is do evil for evil. Get your own back. Whatever they've done to you, you can do back to them. You can diss them. You can post stuff. You can do whatever. That's the predictable story. That's what everyone does. But Jesus calls us to be different. He calls us to approach those situations in a different way with a heart of love. And so we can have a predictable story, or we can have a remarkable story where we do good over evil. You will have met people who do that. You will have met people who haven't chosen to get their own back. And when you talk with them, you discover they are remarkable people. And they say, how do you do that? How is it that you can not just try and get your own back? People are amazed at the remarkable story. Listen, I know this is really easy for me to say, and I don't know your circumstances. But in a sense, I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm trying to inspire you to a different, more remarkable life, a life that Jesus calls us to, a life that Jesus lived, a life modeled by him. And do you know what? It is impossible unless we can experience what we have sung about today, the overwhelming, reckless love of God. When we've experienced it, when God pours his love into our hearts through his Holy Spirit, that love can then seep out. And if you want to be able to love the person who has caused you most harm, if you're wanting to follow Jesus for love being the marker, then we need to allow his love to flood into our life. If you're struggling to love someone, honestly, get someone to pray with you. Pray for that person with you. Sarah had a situation a while back where she just called her small group to say, will you pray for this person and for me? Just to help get through. Honestly, having that support is so important. But I want you to stand up, please, because we're going to sing. And I want us to read these words out together. And then the band are going to lead us as we sing about the incredible love that never gives up on you and me. So all of this is only possible when we allow God's love to be poured into our hearts. through his Holy Spirit. And we say, God, I can't do this without you. Boy, I need you. Here we go. Let's say it together. So, chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second best, quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic, all-purpose garment. Never be without it. Never leave home without it. Let's sing about this amazing love that God gives to us and he wants us to pass on to others.